NASA has pushed back the launch of the Artemis II mission. It is a mission to the far side of the moon, now scheduled to blast off in early March. The space agency had hoped to launch the rocket this coming Sunday with its crew of 4 that includes a Canadian aboard the Orion spacecraft. But technicians discovered a hydrogen leak during tests yesterday. That prompted the delay. The rocket was moved from its massive hangar to the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida 2 weeks ago. The agency says the rocket will stay on the pad while this issue is resolved. And let's bring in our science and climate specialist, Darius Mahdavi, and tell us more about the issue here.
So the rocket does not use fuel like you would put in your car or normal vehicles that we operate day to day. It uses a mix of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, both of which have to be kept very, very cold. We're talking the hydrogen below minus 250 degrees Celsius. And that is a difficult task, to say the least. And a leak is a very big problem because in addition to needing to stay very cold, the hydrogen also has a tendency to go boom, to put it mildly. So a leak like this is a really big deal, and it's a large part of the reason why this launch was delayed, although it's not the only problem. There were also issues surrounding some of the communications with the ground. There was a nozzle that was not working quite right, or a valve, sorry, and then a bit of a problem in terms of the speed with which ground crews were able to get the rocket going. So a few issues here that NASA decided, okay, we need to put the brakes on this, we need to delay. Now, this is probably not the best news for the astronauts who have all been in quarantine for the last 2 weeks or so. Once we get to that next launch window in March, which is when NASA says they're now targeting, they're going to have to go into quarantine for another 2 weeks before they go up, because of course you really don't want to have anybody getting sick in space.
Yeah, so had none of these problems arose, then the launch window would have opened up on Sunday night, and a potential launch could have happened anytime in the next 5 or 6 days from Sunday onward. Now, all of a sudden, they're looking at a month later, that the launch window is not going to open up until, I think, Friday, March the 6th. So,
that's right.
So why these limited launch windows?
So there is a very limited time with which everything lines up just right for one of these launches to happen. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, the mission is designed to use both the Earth and the Moon's gravity as kind of a slingshot, and there's only a certain window of time when those orbits line up. But then also, in order to get power, the Orion capsule really relies on these solar panels. They don't want to use extra weight or space to load it full of batteries for power, and so they basically need to make sure they avoid a situation where the Orion capsule experiences its own mini eclipse. And there's a very limited window of time every month where they can do that. And so these solar panels that, this is the Artemis I that launched a couple of years ago, they need to make sure that they're in the sun at all times. And again, just a very limited window to do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to need the next 3 weeks to troubleshoot, although I'm sure they're glad they have it. But it does mean that that'll be the next window that comes up. And we may even look at pushing the launch to April, depending on how fast these issues can be resolved.
Artemis I was an uncrewed mission using this spacecraft. Artemis II is going to be have a crew of 4. They are going to go the furthest from Earth that any human crew, any crew, has ever gone before. Tell us more about the Artemis II mission.
Well, that is a great point you make. And right now, there is actually a question of whether this will be the furthest a manned mission has gone because of the fact that this has been delayed. So the reason that this was going to be the furthest humans have gone was twofold. One, they were going to be doing it at a time when the Earth was, when the Moon was furthest away from the Earth. And the second was that they were going to be taking a bit of a longer trajectory, further away from the Moon. Now, when both those things line up, they will definitely be the furthest to go away from Earth. But if we don't see, sorry, if we can put that graphic back in the monitor, if we don't see them launch at a time when the Moon is furthest from Earth, then it's going to be a different picture. Because at times, the Moon is as much as 405,000 kilometers from Earth, but it can also be as close as 360,000. If they, because of the distance the astronauts are going further than the Apollo missions, Apollo 13 happened when the Moon was at its furthest point. So if they end up launching the mission when the Moon is closer to Earth, they actually won't be the furthest away from Earth. But still a major mission, still a milestone. First time in half a century we're going that distance away from Earth. It's going to be a big deal no matter what.
Of this I know for sure. Only 24 humans have ever gone beyond Earth's orbit, and so the 4 crew members will join that incredibly select group of people.
This is as far as any astronaut's been in the last half century. That's how far the Artemis astronauts are going. It'll be a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, my next guest is on the Artemis III science team. He was due to fly to Florida for the Artemis II launch. Gordon Osinski is a planetary geologist, and he joins us now from London, Ontario. Thank you very much for connecting with us. As someone with ties to the Artemis missions, were you disappointed when you heard this morning that this launch has been postponed?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, definitely a little bit of disappointment, but I think it's well justified. As the previous your colleague was on there talking about the leaks and things. This is the first time we're putting humans on this spacecraft, so we absolutely want to make sure that everything is as safe as it possibly can be.
You have a personal connection to two of the astronauts from Artemis II. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Jeremy Hansen in particular, who of course is our Canadian representative on this flight, I started training him in geology over 15 years ago now. So not too long after he became an astronaut, I worked with the Canadian Space Agency to essentially set up a program to give the likes of Jeremy, who's not a geologist by background, more experience. And so I took him up to the Arctic on 4 separate trips to remote parts of Nunavut and Northwest Territories. And then with Artemis, as the Artemis program got going, we worked with NASA to bring him and Christina up to a site in Labrador in 2023.
I had the pleasure of spending some time with Jeremy Hansen in Houston in September, was struck by his humility, struck by his courage, but more than anything, just how intelligent he is, which I think is a prerequisite for all of the astronauts. I take it he was probably a pretty good student.
Absolutely, yeah. They're all, I've worked with quite a lot of astronauts now, and there's one thing in common is that they're incredibly quick learners, ask amazing questions, and they really pick things up quickly. And, like you say, Jeremy is just such a down-to-earth person too, so it's not intimidating at all to be working with him in the field, and, feels like a colleague and an assistant beside me and a friend rather than, a teacher kind of professor relationship.
Yeah, and the other part of that is he's a fighter pilot, right? He was a CF-18 fighter pilot, has flown a lot of missions, and that kind of swagger that Hollywood tells us you need to be a fighter pilot, none of that is evident when somebody like me as a civilian has contact with him. So you taught him and another astronaut about geology. Did they teach you anything? I always learn from the astronauts too, particular kind of leadership skills and working in a team dynamic. That's something that they do day to day. Operational readiness, as a geologist and an academic, it's a totally different kind of way of life than your frontline fighter pilot and astronaut, of course. And so it's definitely a two-way learning relationship. Yeah, that's interesting you would say that, because when I talked to Jeremy, when I talked to Jenny, who's the other Canadian who is Jeremy Hansen's backup, they talked a lot about teamwork. Teamwork seems to be a really critical part of the skill set for astronauts. And so let's finish with this. We assume Artemis II will launch without any complications. What do you hope for the 4 astronauts who will be on board this mission?
I mean, it's going to be a trip of the lifetime, right? As the previous colleague said, it's been over 50 years. It's 54 years since we've had any humans go to the moon. And so many of us were not alive to see even the last Apollo landing, let alone the first moon landing. And so, this is going to be an amazing experience for them. And I think I'd love to hear back from them as they're flying around the moon. They'll get, as they come back around the far side, back into the view of Earth. I think I look forward to hearing from them.
It's going to be fantastic, and we're looking at some pictures now of the spacecraft and a big American flag, but on the shoulder of Jeremy Hansen is a big Canadian flag, because Canada is an important part of this mission. Gordon Osinski, planetary geologist and a member of the Artemis III science team, thank you very much.
Thank you.